So my goal here today is to just give you some tools and some tips. So if you're ever in the situation where you do need to hire somebody to come into a loved one's home, to come into your own home to care for a loved one, or anything like that, that you can make sure and do your due diligence so we can screen these people out, hopefully. Okay? And what I want you to understand is that the tools and the tips I'm giving you today are not something that a police officer would use. For example, I just want to give you ways to identify red flags. Red flags with these people so you can say, I'm passing on you, I'm not hiring you. You don't need evidence like a police officer or a prosecutor does to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. You just need to have a gut instinct of, this is not the right person to come in, and how are we going to do that? And there's three major ways I'm going to outline. One is conducting an interview with this person. So you're going to sit down and you're going to interview this person, and generally your interviews are going to consist of the basics. You know, what is your training? What are your certifications? You know, if it's a long-term babysitter or if it's a nanny, have you gone through the Red Cross's babysitter training course or whatever that might be? If it's an elder care provider, you know, what are your certifications? Who have you worked for in the past? Were there any problems in those places that you've worked at in the past? But what I want you to understand is that when you're interviewing somebody and they've had somewhat of a jaded past, or they're coming in possibly with ill intentions, they're prepared to give you a smokescreen. They're prepared to answer all these questions and to provide you with answers that are going to placate you, while they might be lying, or they might be, you know, giving you shades of gray in the truth. So I want to help you kind of get over that. The next step would be what to do when you're calling the references. It's so important to call the references, and we'll talk about that. And then the next step is conducting a background investigation of these people. And what I want you to understand is that I have designed this for those people who need to do this step but can't afford to hire a firm or a private investigator to go out and do it for them. But anyway, when it comes to the interview, the most important thing that I can tell you is that you have to ask the question that you want the answer to. And this is a super important thing for police officers to remember too, because does anybody know what the #1 question that we don't ask to suspects is? Anybody know?
Did you do it?
Yeah, did you do it? That's what we want to know, right? That's the whole purpose of this big, you know, Andy Sipowicz phone book in the interview room, you know, interview. Okay, you got that. We don't really do that.
I hope so.
But that's the whole purpose of these big interviews and all the interview and interrogation training we go to. And then police officers even are apprehensive to look somebody in the eye and say, did you do this? Because something socially has kind of taught us that this is politically incorrect, or we're going to offend this person or something like that. But anyway, we have to ask the questions that we want answers to. So the first thing is ask direct questions. Understand that we want to know, do you steal? Do you use drugs? Do you have any issues with alcohol, whatever that may be? And understand that this person may well come into this interview totally prepared to lie to you. If they're a bad person, they're going to be prepared to lie. So now what do we do? So they say, no, I never have. You can call X, Y, and Z people, because they know nobody knows that I've ever done any of this stuff, and no. So what we're looking for then, instead of what they say, is how they say it, okay? And so we're looking for red flag behaviors right here. And you've got to trust your gut. You've got to trust your intuition. Intuition is knowing without knowing why. I don't have time to go into the science of this, but it is fascinating, at least to me. Intuition is fascinating because there have been tests done on intuition that show that if you take an expert, the foremost expert in a field, say on European geography here in the United States, and you ask them a series of questions on European geography, and then you ask me a series of questions on European geography, I'm about 90% as likely to be right as the expert. That's intuition. Intuition's amazing because you and your ancestors and all your genetics have been absorbing all these different survival traits and pieces of information throughout their entire lives and your entire lives. It's all passed along to you. And you have a subconscious working in you that is giving you signs and signals and giving you information that you can't explain why you know it or why you believe it. But intuition works. I urge you all to get and read the book called The Gift of Fear. I know the title makes it sound scary, but it is a fantastic book. I've read it a couple times. I teach a class at Boise State on domestic violence, and I give it to all my students there for free because it is such a good book. Gavin DeBecker is one of the foremost experts on intuition in the real world, not a professor, but in the real world in the United States. And he writes a great book and talks about intuition and how it could have helped people in the past. Yes, ma'am.
So you